April Cummings in for Donna Bush with your CIG-TV news brief and weather forecast on this Wednesday. Thank you for being here. Each year, the United Nations marks International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction on the 13th of October. The day celebrates how people and communities around the world are reducing their exposure to disasters and raising awareness about the importance of reining in the risks they face. To mark the observance, CIG-TV sat down with the team at Hazard Management Cayman Islands to talk about the work being done by this small team to mitigate the risks of disasters in the islands. Marked by an earthquake, a global pandemic, and a number of severe weather incidents, the last 2 years have been extremely busy for the team responsible for disaster management here. HMCI Director Danielle Coleman talked about the importance of the observance. She also explains the relevance of this year's theme, which focuses on how international cooperation can benefit developing countries like the Cayman Islands.
Every year on the 13th of October, it's International Day of Risk Reduction. It's a really important day because obviously we spend so much time at Hazard Management responding to emergencies as well as preparing for them. But on the 13th of October every year, we make sure we're focusing on mitigation. And of course, we focus on mitigation throughout the year as well. But this is a day we come together to celebrate around the world risk reduction and mitigation efforts. So as far as international cooperation goes, and that's obviously the theme this year, international cooperation and national cooperation on risk reduction is critical. You know, we have so much a good relationship, obviously, with the FCDO in London and the Ministry of Defence. We work very closely with the Governor's Office here to make sure that we can respond to emergencies. I mean, the COVID pandemic is a great example. They very much assisted with the masks and the PCR testing and the vaccinations. So there's so much of that great stuff coming in from the UK to support Cayman. As well, again, the Ministry of Defence, we have the naval assets in the region, so anytime we have a hurricane or in fact, any emergency that we need response to, the naval assets are there to support us. And again, they are quite far-reaching, so there's a lot of support coming in from international, from the UK and so forth. As well as SEDEMA. We are members of SEDEMA now. So again, you know, they have a rapid response team. And we saw last year that with the COVID pandemic, masks were given to us from SEDEMA and the other stakeholders. So there's a lot of relationship building there. And again, it's a very solid relationship.
Preparedness and Planning Officer Teresita De Silva explains that during a disaster like COVID-19, the National Emergency Operations Center acts as a hub for disaster management operations.
So in the National Emergency Operations Center, we have obviously a structure that we use to respond to emergencies. Within this structure, there are a number of different departments and agencies that focus on key areas of their expertise. And a lot of times we work with them throughout the year to identify ways to improve or reduce our risks in responding to any type of event so that we're not just being reactive, we're being more proactive. So throughout the year we meet with them, we go through mitigation efforts, identify ways that we can improve our response, as well as ways that we can improve our preparedness.
Logistics and Operations Officer Dan Powell outlined how the NEOC, as it's known, can act to mitigate the impact of emergencies on Caymanians and residents.
So when it comes to an assistance family that's being isolated right now due to the COVID-19, we work with the voluntary agencies such as Red Cross, multiple NGOs. But in essence, right now, our National Emergency Operational Center, we are mainly focusing right now with Red Cross when it comes to distribution of food. And we do understand that not a lot of people do need support, but the people that do need support, they reach out and we reach out to them and get as much information and then get them what they need. It could be from groceries to medication to special, we do get special requests. So that's how we do use our voluntary agencies as it stands right now.
Mr. Powell notes there are steps people can take to reduce the impact of emergencies like hurricanes and COVID.
Prior to hurricane season, what we try to do is encourage individuals to be prepared, have plans in place, have food rations in place, because obviously we knew after the hurricanes or after any natural disaster, we're going to be short on limited supplies. So in the midst of the hurricane season, we're having families not just be dedicated or specified to that period. Obviously with COVID around now, we want families to have a ration for 14 days. You know, that might be pushing it, but that is a safe margin because that's what we're expecting you to be in isolation for. And we do have protocols in place where you could early release, but we're just basing it off of the youngest person. And if the youngest person is not vaccinated, then it's we're going to stay there. Correction, you're going to stay there for 14 days.
The Department of Environment has also used International Day of Disaster Reduction observance to highlight the risk that global warming poses to the islands. Director Gina Ebanks-Petrie spoke to CIG-TV about the current and future impacts of global warming on the Cayman Islands and the steps we can take now to address these threats.
One of the important messages that we need to start articulating more clearly is that we're already experiencing climate change. So the world has already warmed by 1.1 degrees C since the 1900s, pre-industrial times, and that is set to increase. And what we now know is that we have to keep that warming to 1.5 degrees or lower in order to avoid the worst catastrophic impacts of climate change. Because of the way that the global climate system works, we've already sort of locked in a number of issues in relation to climate change. So sea level rise, for example, is one of those things that's already locked in, and it will be locked in for centuries. The extent to which we see that the sea level rise is going to depend on how much the globe can agree to cut global emissions, and that's why COP26 coming up in November is so important, because this really is crunch time for the world in terms of committing to reductions that are meaningful, that will see us at net zero by mid-century, which is what we need to be in order to keep warming to 1.5 degrees C or lower. And that, again, because I don't think we can say this enough, that is so important. It is critical for low-lying islands like ours. Again, sea level rise, you're talking about threats. We've seen 0.2 of a meter already between 1901 and 2018, and that is just predicted to increase over time, and the amount of increase is directly linked to what we're doing in terms of cutting our greenhouse gas emissions. So we still have a measure of control as people on Earth, and I think that we need to understand that the degree to which we experience the impacts of climate change, so heat waves, for example, in the Caribbean and Cayman, we take being hot for granted. But what we're going to see, and what we're already seeing, is that we are going to get hotter, and we're going to have more hot periods more frequently. And that has multiple impacts across sectors. So agriculture has impacts for crop yields, for tourism, for health, for human health. There are many, many directly attributable diseases from heat stress, but also from vector-borne diseases that will increase as a result of increased temperatures, and of course, hurricanes.
The DOE director also explains some of the impacts that the Cayman Islands can expect if global warming continues.
We're all familiar with hurricanes here in the region, and because of the warming climate, warming oceans, we are going to see more intense hurricanes, not necessarily more frequently, apparently is what the models are showing, but when they do come, they will be more intense. Rainfall, where Caribbean will dry, it will be 25 to 30% drier in our region of the Caribbean in the future, is what's predicted. When we do get rain, it's going to come heavier, which will be a problem for flooding, etc. But what we will see is that there will be longer periods between our rainy seasons, for example. So our rainy seasons will contract, and we'll have more droughts, more heat waves. We are dealing with ocean acidification in the actual marine environment, and the impacts on coral reefs and many of our iconic species like conch and lobster in terms of their survival. It's predicted that many of our species will move north in order to accommodate to a warming ocean. So the impacts are extensive, and they are across our sectors, like I said, and I think that Cayman now needs to accept that we must start planning for the future now. We can't do this, tomorrow when the impact is the following day. We have to do it now because climate change is already happening.
Ms. Ebanks-Petrie also notes that despite our size, there are steps the Cayman Islands can take now to support the global effort.
In terms of our overall emissions of greenhouse gases, they're relatively insignificant from a global scale. I think our total emissions were about 1 megaton of carbon dioxide in 2019. So insignificant on a global scale. But when you look at our per capita emissions, how much does each of us emit per person over a year? Those are really high. So we're up at 15.1 tons of carbon dioxide compared with even the UK, who are somewhere around 10, or Bermuda's around 10. The UK is even lower than that. So many countries in our region have much lower per capita emissions. And I know that people will say, well, you know, it's because we all drive cars and we have to, et cetera. And I think that is like rather the point, that we need to take a look at the sustainability of our lifestyle here generally, and to think about ways that we can make the way that we live more sustainable, including for greenhouse gas emissions. It's terribly important. There is no bigger issue in my mind that we need to be attending to right now. It will affect all of us in all sectors, and we just need to be prepared for it, and we need to plan appropriately for it.
Also Wednesday, Chief Medical Officer Dr. John Lee shared the latest COVID-19 test results from travelers and community members. Dr. Lee also reports on the updated vaccination statistics.
As of 8 a.m. on Wednesday, the 13th of October, there have been 618 PCR tests done for the virus SARS-CoV-2, which you know causes COVID-19 disease. This is since the last report yesterday morning. Of these, there are 2 positive tests in travellers on exit from quarantine and 13 positive tests from the community, of which 8 of whom are children. As for the vaccinations, there are 109,668 vaccinations having been given across the islands, of which 55,723 are first doses, representing 78% of our estimated 71,106 population. 53,258 people have completed the 2-dose course, and that represents 75% of our population, and 687 people have had a 3rd or booster dose. Something I omitted to tell you yesterday, but it's good news to say that the lateral flow test, the first order, arrived on the British Airways flight on Monday evening and are now being stored at the HSA whilst we work out the plans to deploy them. Obviously, this first deployment will be in school children, as that's where we know we have a current outbreak. Hopefully, I'll be able to produce a video shortly with the assistance of the Government Information Systems to demonstrate how easy it is to use these simple tests.
Turning now to tonight's forecast, partly cloudy skies with a 30% chance of showers, with temperatures falling to the mid-70s. Winds out of the east to northeast at 5 knots or less. Smooth seas, wave heights less than 2 feet. Today's synopsis calls for isolated showers along with light easterly winds and smooth seas across the Cayman area for the next 24 hours. It's in association with a weak pressure gradient over the northwest Caribbean. Radar images are showing some isolated showers in and around the Cayman Islands, moving towards the west. And a reminder, you can always find the latest local weather conditions online at weather.gov.ky, or you can download their mobile app. That's it for today's news brief here on CIG Television. I'm April Cummings, standing in for Donna Bush, inviting you to join us again here tomorrow evening. Until then, have a great night.